The unexpected encounter. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled through the thick alien jungle. The crash had left him battered and bruised, his ship reduced to nothing more than a twisted pile of metal. His head throbbed from a deep gash, and his legs felt like lead. The pain was unbearable, but he had to keep moving. He was on an unfamiliar planet, far from Earth. The thick trees above him formed an endless canopy, blocking out much of the sky. Strange creatures watched from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dim light, but none came close. Daniel didn't know if they were predators or simply curious, but he didn't have time to figure it out. His only focus was survival. He had no idea where he was or how he had ended up here. The last thing he remembered was a fiery explosion in space. His ship had been hit by something, maybe a meteorite, maybe a weapon. Everything had gone black after that. And now, here he was, lost on a hostile world with no way to call for help. Minutes turned into hours. The jungle grew thicker, the air heavier. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps, his body screaming for rest. But he knew if he stopped, he wouldn't survive. He had to keep going, no matter the cost. Then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, something strange happened. In the distance, through the thick trees, he saw a flicker of light. It wasn't the soft, natural glow of the bioluminescent plants that surrounded him. No, this light was different, sharp, almost artificial. Curiosity tugged at him, pushing him forward. The pain in his body made each step feel like an eternity, but he didn't care. He had to see what that light was. As he got closer, he noticed something even stranger. A small cave opening appeared before him, hidden beneath a thick blanket of vines and moss. The light was coming from inside. But it wasn't the glow of any plant or insect he had seen. It was more like electricity. The light flickered, pulsed in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Daniel approached cautiously, his hand resting on the rough rock wall beside him. The temperature around the entrance felt colder, and an unsettling feeling crept up his spine. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't turn back now. Stepping inside the cave, Daniel's eyes adjusted to the dim light. The air was damp, and the ground was uneven, covered in sharp stones. But the strangest thing of all was the large, shimmering energy field that filled the space. It looked like a force field, glowing faintly in the dark, its edges rippling like liquid. And then, through the glow of the field, he saw her. At first, Daniel thought he was imagining things. He had seen strange creatures before on alien planets, but this was different. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin was a deep shade of green, smooth and flawless, almost glowing in the light. Her eyes, bright and luminous, watched him with an intensity that made him feel both terrified and mesmerized. Her long silver hair hung in loose waves down her back, shimmering like strands of silk. Her body was lean and graceful, but there was a strength in her posture, a quiet power that made the air feel charged. Daniel froze in place, unsure of what to do. The woman looked human, at least, mostly, but there was something about her that was entirely alien. Her features were sharp, almost sculpted, and her skin shimmered in a way that was impossible for a human to mimic. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's heart raced, 1,000 thoughts running through his head. Was this some kind of trap? Was she dangerous? Or was she in trouble, just like him? The woman's gaze softened, and then, in a voice that was surprisingly clear, she spoke. "You found me." Her voice was like music, soft, melodic, but with a hint of something ancient, something wise. It sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. All he could do was stare at her. The woman seemed to understand his confusion. She looked down at the force field surrounding her, then back at him. "Please," she said. I need your help." Daniel's mind raced. He had no idea who she was or why she was here, but there was something in her eyes, something desperate, that made him hesitate. He wanted to help. He had to help. But would it be worth the risk? What? What are you? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse, his throat dry from the hours of walking and the fear that now gripped him. How did you get here? The woman's expression darkened, and she looked away, as if the memory was too painful to relive. I was captured, she said quietly, her voice filled with sadness. I'm not from this planet. I'm from a world far away. My people, we were hunted, trapped, left to die. Daniel's heart tightened. He couldn't imagine what she must have been through. What do you need? He asked, taking a cautious step forward. Her eyes met his again, and this time, there was a flicker of something else. Hope. Free me, she said. You're the first one to find me. You're my only chance. Daniel glanced at the glowing field around her, then back at her pleading eyes. Without another thought, he stepped forward, determined to help this stranger, this alien woman, in whatever way he could. But as his hand reached for the force field, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger, something dangerous, and he was already in too deep. The first rescue. Daniel took a cautious step closer, his heart hammering in his chest. His hand twitched toward the small blaster at his side, a reflex, but he quickly stopped himself. There was something in her voice, something desperate yet calm, that told him this wasn't a trap. The alien woman's eyes locked onto his, and for a fleeting moment, he saw a flash of vulnerability there. She wasn't just a strange creature. She was a prisoner, a being trapped in an invisible cage of her own design. I can't free myself, she said softly, her voice like a whisper carried on the wind. The field is too strong. But you can. Daniel hesitated. His mind raced. He had no idea how to disable the force field, or even if he should. What if she was more dangerous than she appeared? What if she was setting him up to lower his guard before striking? But something about her expression, the way her eyes shimmered with hope, drove him to act. He couldn't leave her here, even if she was an alien. He'd never been one to abandon someone in need, no matter how strange or different they were. He stepped forward cautiously, examining the glowing field. It hummed with energy, its surface undulating like water disturbed by a breeze. Whatever technology was behind this was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Let me try, Daniel said, his voice rough, filled with uncertainty but also determination. The alien woman gave a small nod, her gaze never leaving him. There was no fear in her eyes, only expectation, as if she knew that somehow he was the key to her freedom. Daniel's mind raced, thinking back to the technical training he'd received as part of his crew. He had worked with alien tech before, though nothing this advanced. But he had to try. He kneeled down beside the force field, studying its energy signature. His fingers brushed along the edge of the field, and the air around him crackled, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. He gritted his teeth and pulled back, his skin tingling from the shock. Damn it, Daniel muttered under his breath, frustration building. The woman, watching him closely, spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Focus. You must think of it as a puzzle, an equation. Her words were oddly soothing, and for a moment, Daniel felt his racing thoughts slow. She was right. This wasn't just brute force. This was about understanding the structure of the field. Taking a deep breath, Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his mind. He needed a solution. As he opened his eyes, he realized that there were patterns in the way the field pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. It was rhythmic, predictable. If he could just match the right frequency. With a sudden burst of clarity, Daniel fumbled through his pack, pulling out a small device, a communicator he had modified for emergencies. He began adjusting the settings, sensing it to the field's energy signature. As the device hummed to life, the force field flickered, its glow dimming slightly. Then, in a split second, the field vanished with a soft pop. Daniel blinked in surprise. It had worked. The alien woman was free. She stepped forward, slowly at first, as if testing her newfound freedom. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You did it," she whispered, her voice full of awe. She took another step forward, closer to him, her movements graceful and fluid, as though she hadn't been trapped for so long. Daniel felt an unexpected rush of pride. He had done it. Against all odds, he had freed her, but as she moved closer, he couldn't help but notice the strange energy that seemed to pulse around her, subtle, but undeniable. She wasn't just any alien. There was power in her, something that hinted at the vastness of her strength. "You're free now," Daniel said, his voice cautious but relieved. "What are you going to do?" The alien woman paused, her eyes searching his face, as if weighing something important. Her gaze softened, and she placed a hand on her chest, her fingers glowing faintly. "I owe you everything," she said, her tone both humble and intense. "I was trapped for so long. I thought I'd never be free. But now, I will help you. In return for your kindness." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Was she just grateful, or was there something more to her words? He didn't know if he could fully trust her yet. She had been a prisoner for who knows how long. Was she really an ally, or was he just the means to an end? Before he could voice his concerns, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble echoed through the cave, followed by a series of sharp, echoing growls from deep within the jungle. The alien woman's eyes narrowed. Her expression shifted instantly from gratitude to something far more intense. She turned to Daniel, her body tense, her hand reaching toward the air like she was summoning something. "Get ready," she said, her voice suddenly hard and commanding. "We're not alone." A shadow darted past the entrance to the cave. Daniel's heart raced. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The alien's secret. For a long moment, Daniel stood there, unsure of what to say. The air between them felt heavy, charged with unspoken words. Zorana. He had learned her name when she spoke it quietly after the force field fell, looked at him with those glowing eyes, and something inside him stirred. Was she grateful? Or was there more to her than he could understand? Zorana began, her voice trailing off, as if trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to thank you for this. You've given me more than just freedom. You've given me a chance at revenge." The word caught Daniel off guard. Revenge. His heart skipped a beat. He had freed this woman from a prison, only to find that she might be seeking something far darker than simple survival. "Revenge," Daniel echoed, his brow furrowing. He took a step back, instinctively raising his guard. Against who? Zorana didn't flinch. Instead, she turned, walking slowly toward the center of the cave, where the last remnants of the force field still shimmered faintly in the air. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes distant now, as if she was seeing something beyond the walls of the cave. Something from her past. "There's someone," she said quietly, her voice hardening with each word. "Someone who betrayed me. Someone who destroyed everything my kind stood for." She paused, her face tightening with emotion. "My people were the rulers of the stars once, human. We were powerful beyond your understanding. But we were betrayed, hunted down like animals. Now, I am the last of my kind." Daniel's heart sank as he realized the weight of her words. He had suspected, of course, that she wasn't just an innocent traveler trapped by bad luck. But hearing her speak so openly about it, about an entire race wiped out, made him feel a deep, unsettled pity for her. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why stay hidden?" Zorana turned to face him fully now, her glowing eyes intense, filled with an unyielding resolve. "Because I was trapped, not just by that field," she said, pointing to the faint glow in the air. "I was a prisoner of my own species' destruction. For years, I've been waiting for a chance, hoping for someone to find me. Someone strong enough to help me avenge my people. A heavy silence filled the air. Daniel didn't know how to respond. He had expected an alien encounter to be about survival, about getting back to his ship or calling for rescue. He hadn't expected to be caught in the middle of an intergalactic war, or to be swept up in someone else's quest for vengeance. As if sensing his hesitation, Zorana's expression softened. She stepped toward him, her long, graceful form like a predator in motion, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I don't want to use you, human, but there is no one else left to trust." Her touch was light but firm, sending an unexpected shiver down Daniel's spine. "I've been alone for too long, and I can't fight this battle by myself. You saved me. Now you must help me finish what was started." Daniel's mind raced. He was just one man. He had no special training, no military experience. He had survived by luck, by being in the right place at the right time. And now, he was being asked to join a war that had been raging for centuries. The stakes felt impossibly high. But Zorana's eyes held a fire that refused to be extinguished. There was something in her gaze, a fierce strength, a warrior's spirit, that made Daniel feel he couldn't back down now. Whether he wanted to or not, he was already too deep in this. "How do we fight this battle?" he asked, his voice steady despite the doubt gnawing at him. "Who are we fighting?" Zorana turned, a sudden bitterness creeping into her voice. "The ones who destroyed my people are still out there. The Vorthar." She spat the name like it was poison on her tongue. "They were once our allies, but greed and lust for power twisted their minds. They turned on us, destroyed our empire, and scattered us to the winds. The Vorthar are merciless. They have technology that even your people could not comprehend. I was meant to die with the rest of us, but fate had other plans." Daniel listened intently, his mind racing to keep up. The Vorthar, an enemy more terrifying than any human could imagine. And now, Zorana, the last of her kind, was asking for his help to defeat them. Could he really do this? "You said you have nothing left," Daniel said slowly. "But you have me now. I'm not much, but I'll help you." Zorana looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. A flicker of gratitude flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something harder, something cold. "Good," she said, her voice firm, "because the Vorthar are coming, and they will not stop until every last trace of my people is erased from existence." Daniel could feel the weight of her words, the gravity of the situation settling on his shoulders. He had just been a simple explorer, but now he was a soldier in a war he had never asked for. He glanced at Zorana, wondering if he truly understood what he was getting into. But one thing was clear. He was in this now, whether he liked it or not. The path ahead would be dangerous, and it would test every ounce of his strength and willpower. As Zorana turned to lead the way out of the cave, her posture more confident now, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. The galaxy was vast, but this war, this battle for survival, would soon bring them face to face with enemies unlike any he had ever imagined. And for the first time, Daniel realized just how small he had been in the grand scheme of things. The alien war. Zorana's voice grew colder, her eyes darkening as she spoke. "The ones who destroyed my people, they call themselves Vranar." Her words were laced with contempt, her lips curling slightly. "A race of conquerors, relentless in their thirst for power. They've slaughtered entire worlds, and when they finished with mine, they erased all evidence that we ever existed." Daniel's throat tightened at the mention of the Vranar. He had heard of them. Vague rumors of a race of ruthless beings who left nothing but ashes in their wake. But hearing Zorana speak so personally about them, about the annihilation of her people, made it feel all too real. This wasn't some far-off conflict. It was something that had destroyed everything she had ever known. "The Vranar are coming," Zorana continued, her voice low and filled with a growing fire. "They believe we are all dead. They think they've won, but they're wrong. There's one thing they overlooked, the one thing they never accounted for. Me." Daniel couldn't help but admire the raw determination in her voice. It was the voice of someone who had lost everything, but still had the strength to fight back. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he couldn't turn away now, not when the stakes were so high, and not when she had placed her trust in him. "We have to stop them before they destroy more," Zorana said, her gaze unwavering. "I know where their fleet is stationed. I know where they've hidden their greatest weapon. If we strike first, we can take them down. But I need you, Daniel. I need your help to get there." The urgency in her voice was contagious. Daniel could feel the adrenaline starting to pulse through his veins. He had no clear plan, no backup, and no idea what they were up against. But if they didn't act now, it would be too late. "Where do we start?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. He was no soldier, no warrior, but he had to do something. The alien woman, Zorana, had already shown him a glimpse of her power, and he realized now that the battle ahead wasn't just about survival. It was about justice, about avenging a race that had been wiped out, about stopping an evil that had no place in the galaxy. Zorana's eyes softened, the fierceness in them replaced with a glimmer of something else, a quiet trust. She placed a hand on his shoulder again, this time with a more intimate touch. "We start with a ship," she said simply. "We need to get off this planet and find the Frauner stronghold. I know where it is." Daniel nodded, his mind already shifting into survival mode. "How do we get there? How do we get past their defenses?" Zorana's smile was fleeting, but it held a certain promise. "I've learned to hide in plain sight. I've been doing it for years. I know their systems, and I know how to disable them, how to make sure they don't see us coming." The air around them seemed to hum with anticipation as Zorana turned, stepping toward a shadowed alcove in the back of the cave. With a wave of her hand, a soft blue light flickered to life. It revealed a small but sleek vessel hidden in the shadows. A ship, but unlike anything Daniel had seen before. The ship's design was elegant, almost organic, with smooth flowing lines that seemed to pulse with life. The hull shimmered with an iridescent sheen, and there was no visible engine exhaust, only a faint hum as it rested there, waiting. "This is my ship," Zorana said, her voice filled with pride. "It's not much, but it's fast, and it's stealthy. We can get past the Frauner's radar with ease." Daniel's mouth went dry as he took in the sight. The ship was beautiful, and despite its small size, it radiated power. Its sleek design spoke of technology that was beyond anything humanity had created. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was a tool of war. Zorana walked up to the ship, her hand tracing the hull in a reverent motion. "We'll need to get to their fleet, but we must be careful. The Frauner are smart. They won't fall for the same trick twice. We'll have one shot at this." Daniel's eyes locked onto her, the reality of the mission sinking in. "And what happens if we fail?" Zorana didn't flinch. "We won't fail." Her confidence was unwavering, and it sparked something inside Daniel. She wasn't just asking for his help. She was counting on him. And for the first time since the crash, he realized he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something bigger, a cause that transcended anything he had ever known. They boarded the ship together, the air inside cool and silent. The controls were unfamiliar to Daniel, but Zorana's guidance was precise, her voice steady as she directed him on how to power up the engines. As the ship came to life, a soft glow illuminated the cockpit. Zorana sat beside him, her fingers dancing across the controls with ease. "Hold on," she said, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "We're about to make history." The ship's engines hummed to life, and with a sudden jolt, they launched into the sky, leaving the jungle behind them. The stars were far ahead, but for the first time, Daniel felt like they had a chance. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't alone. And together, they would make sure the Frauner knew that humanity, and the last of the galaxy's fallen races, would not go down without a fight. The twist, trust or betrayal. The silence between Daniel and Zorana hung thick in the air as the sleek alien ship hummed quietly in the cave. Her words echoed in Daniel's mind. We need to get to their fleet, but we must be careful. They were about to embark on a mission that could decide the fate of entire galaxies. Daniel had never signed up for this. He was just a human, one person, with no special skills beyond his survival instincts. But Zorana was right. There was no turning back now. She had placed her trust in him, and there was something in her unwavering gaze that made Daniel believe that she was not someone to be doubted. Zorana turned to face him, her eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. We don't have time to waste, she said. The Vranar are always on the move. If we're going to strike, it has to be now. Daniel nodded, his heart racing. He had no plan, no clear idea of how to actually fight the Vranar. He had barely survived his crash, and now he was being asked to take on an entire army of invincible aliens. But something about Zorana made him feel like he was more than just a man with a blaster. She had given him hope in a way he hadn't expected. You're sure you can disable their defenses? He asked, his voice betraying a slight tremor. He didn't want to sound weak, but the reality of what they were about to do was starting to settle in. Zorana's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. I studied the Vranar for years. I know their weaknesses, their patterns. They think they're untouchable, but they're not. She paused, her voice lowering to a whisper. But you must trust me completely. If you hesitate, if you doubt me, it will cost us both everything. Daniel's mind raced. Trust her. He had already trusted her with his life by freeing her from that force field. But now, she was asking him to believe in her with the life of humanity, with the lives of countless innocent beings. What if she was using him? What if her quest for revenge clouded her judgment? What if he was just a pawn in her game, a means to an end? As if reading his thoughts, Zorana stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. I didn't ask you to help for my sake, Daniel, she said softly, her voice filled with an unexpected tenderness. I asked you to help because the Vranar are a threat to everyone. They've already wiped out entire civilizations. I don't want vengeance alone. I want justice, for my people, for yours, for every species they've destroyed. Daniel's chest tightened. Her words rang with a raw honesty that cut through the doubts swirling in his mind. He couldn't deny the fire in her eyes, the conviction behind her every movement. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a survivor, fighting not just for her life, but for the memory of her people, her home. I'll help, Daniel said finally, his voice steady. But if we're doing this, we're doing it together. No more secrets. Zorana's expression softened, and for a moment, Daniel thought he saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. She nodded slowly. Agreed. The two of them turned toward the ship, the silence of the cave almost oppressive as they prepared to leave. Daniel followed her inside, his mind still buzzing with uncertainty, but there was a quiet resolve building within him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Hours later, as they soared through the starry void, the hum of the ship filling the silence, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The ship had become their sanctuary, its smooth movements across the cosmos offering them both a brief respite from the chaos of the war that awaited them. But Zorana's earlier words replayed in his mind, and he couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that had begun to crawl beneath his skin. He found her at the helm, her focus entirely on the controls, her eyes flicking across the star maps and coordinates with practiced ease. The vastness of space stretched out before them, silent, cold, and unyielding. For a moment, Daniel watched her, contemplating the secrets she had yet to reveal. You mentioned the Vranar's weapon, he said, breaking the silence. What is it, exactly? What are we up against? Zorana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted the ship's course, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the control panel. It's not just a weapon, she said after a long pause, her voice distant. It's something worse, a device that can wipe out entire star systems, a doomsday weapon. The Vranar have been hiding it for years, and it's their ultimate bargaining chip. They've used it to conquer worlds, and they won't hesitate to use it again. Daniel swallowed hard. He had heard of weapons of mass destruction before, but this was something beyond anything he had imagined. Zorana's gaze shifted toward him, a flicker of something like regret in her eyes. I thought I could destroy it, but it's too powerful. I can't do it alone. That's why I need you. Daniel's mind raced. You want me to help you destroy it? Zorana nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. I spent years studying the Vranar systems, but I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands how to think outside the box, someone willing to take risks, like you. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. She had known what she was doing all along. She had planned this from the start, not just to free herself, but to find someone who could help her carry out her mission. He had become more than just a reluctant ally. And then it hit him. He wasn't just helping her for justice anymore. He was a key player in her mission, and his actions could decide the fate of not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. But did he trust her completely? Or was he walking into a trap that he didn't fully understand? Zorana turned back to the controls, her fingers dancing over the panels. Trust me, Daniel. Together, we can end the Vranar reign of terror. The final battle. The endless stretch of stars outside the ship's window seemed like a cold, indifferent sea, but inside, the tension was palpable. The journey to the Vranar stronghold had been quick, too quick. The ship, though beautiful and powerful, had felt unnervingly silent, as if it were hiding some secret. Daniel kept his eyes trained on the controls in front of him, his fingers gripping the edges of the console a little tighter with every passing minute. Zorana had been calm throughout the journey, her expression unreadable. She spoke only when necessary, her focus solely on the mission. But Daniel could feel the weight of her past hanging in the air, pressing down on them both. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper as he glanced at her. She was sitting in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes scanning the distant stars with a fierce determination. I mean this, all of this. The battle ahead, the weapon. Is it the only way? Zorana didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes softened as she turned to him, her face serious. There is no other way, she said, her voice steady. If we don't stop the Vranar now, if we don't destroy their command ship, they will only continue their war, conquering and erasing every world in their path. My people died because they didn't act in time. I won't let that happen again. Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The weight of her words hit him like a hammer. What she was asking him to do wasn't just about fighting. It was about preventing the destruction of everything they knew. I understand, he said, though the words tasted bitter. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a general or a leader. But here, now, with Zorana by his side, he felt like he could be something more. The ship's sensors beeped suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts. Zorana's eyes flicked to the readout, and her expression hardened. They've detected us, she said, her voice ice-cold. It's too late to turn back now. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. The Vranar were coming for them, and there was no way out. The confrontation was inevitable. As Zorana initiated the ship's cloaking system, the world outside seemed to vanish. The stars disappeared, the vast emptiness of space shrouded by a shimmering field of energy. They were invisible for now, but it wouldn't last long. Stay sharp, Zorana warned, her fingers dancing over the controls. We'll need to make it to their command ship before they launch their counterattack. Daniel's hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, even though he didn't know how much good it would do against the Vranar's advanced weaponry. This wasn't going to be a typical fight. This was going to be a war, and everything about it screamed that it was going to be brutal. The ship glided silently through the void, the tension building with every second that passed. Daniel couldn't help but feel that something was wrong, something he couldn't quite place. His instincts had kept him alive in impossible situations before, and now they were screaming at him. "We're almost there," Zorana said. Her eyes were locked onto the tactical map on the screen. "Stay ready." Daniel took a deep breath and adjusted his grip on his weapon. The ship came out of stealth mode, and what they had been waiting for appeared before them. A massive Vranar warship, its sleek, jagged hull covered in scars from countless battles. It hung like a dark shadow against the backdrop of distant stars, a leviathan that could wipe out entire fleets with ease. As they approached, Zorana's face darkened. "They've activated their defenses," she muttered. "Brace yourself." Suddenly, the space around them erupted with fire. Lasers shot through the darkness, illuminating the cold expanse of space as the Vranar warship unleashed everything it had. "Hold on," Zorana shouted, jerking the controls to the left as a laser blast grazed the side of the ship. The whole vessel shuddered violently, throwing Daniel against his seat. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus as Zorana expertly maneuvered the ship, narrowly dodging another wave of fire. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was about stopping the Vranar for good. They couldn't afford to fail. Zorana's hands were a blur as she engaged the ship's weapons, launching a volley of missiles at the Vranar ship's exposed energy core. Explosions rocked the massive vessel, and its defensive shields flickered momentarily, giving them the opening they needed. "That's our chance," Zorana shouted. "Prepare to board." Without waiting for Daniel's response, Zorana engaged the ship's docking mechanism, locking onto a breach in the Vranar warship's hull. With a sharp hiss, the airlock sealed, and they were inside. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as they stepped out onto the alien ship. The corridors were vast and cold, metallic walls stretching as far as the eye could see. The Vranar didn't make ships for comfort. They made them for war. "I'll take the lead," Zorana said, her voice low and commanding. She had changed completely in this moment. No longer the prisoner, no longer the survivor, but the warrior she was born to be. "Stay behind me. Trust me." Her eyes locked onto his. "And remember, this isn't just about us. It's about every world they've destroyed, every life they've taken." Daniel nodded, his mouth dry. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. And together, they were going to make sure the Vranar paid for every death they had caused. As they advanced down the hallway, the ship groaning under their feet, the air thick with the smell of burning metal and adrenaline, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was only the beginning, and that, in the end, victory would come at a far higher cost than either of them could imagine. The final choice. The massive Vranar warship loomed ahead, its sharp edges cutting through the darkness of space like the blade of a cosmic predator. The ship's defenses flared to life, bright energy shields rippling in waves, and laser turrets swiveling to track them. Zorana's ship, small and sleek, was no match for the firepower of the Vranar fleet, but that wasn't the plan. The plan was to get inside, disable the command center, and take down the heart of the beast before it could strike back. Zorana's eyes were locked onto the warship, her face a mask of determination. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Once we breach their outer perimeter, we need to split up. I'll take the central core, you head to the weapon systems. If we're going to end this, we need to destroy their firepower." Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of what they were about to do sent a wave of nausea through him. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was the end of everything the Vranar had built, and it was up to them to tear it all down. The ship shuddered as a blast of energy grazed their shields, the hum of the engines growing louder as they accelerated toward their target. "Hold on," Zorana barked. The ship lurched violently as it shot through the incoming fire, weaving and dodging like a living creature. Daniel gripped his seat, his knuckles white from the tension. He had never been in a fight like this, not in space, not against a foe so deadly. Then, with a sudden jolt, the ship slipped through a gap in the warship's defenses, its cloaking system barely keeping them hidden from detection. The hull of the Vranar vessel loomed so close Daniel could see the razor-sharp plating, the scars of years of battle. "We're in," Zorana said with a cold smile. "Now it's time to move." She didn't wait for a response. With practiced speed, she activated the ship's docking clamps and sent them plunging into the Vranar ship's underbelly. The harsh clang of metal against metal reverberated through the hull as the ship made contact, securing itself to the outer structure. Daniel's heart raced, but he didn't have time for fear. Zorana was already moving toward the hatch, her steps quick and precise. "Let's go," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "We're doing this together." The inside of the Vranar ship was like a nightmare come to life. The walls were jagged, dark, and covered in strange, alien symbols that seemed to writhe as if alive. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and machinery, the faint hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the floor beneath their feet. It was cold, too, an oppressive chill that seemed to seep into Daniel's bones. Zorana led the way, moving with the grace of a predator, her every step calculated. They passed darkened corridors, the shadows flickering with strange, alien lights. The deeper they went, the more Daniel realized how vast and intimidating the Vranar's war machine truly was. This wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress. "Split up," Zorana whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "You'll need to plant the explosive charges in the weapons systems, and I'll disable their core. I'll signal you when it's time to initiate the countdown." Daniel nodded, his hands already sweating despite the cold. He couldn't afford to hesitate. If they didn't destroy the Vranar ship before they were discovered, this whole mission would be in vain. As they parted ways, a sharp sense of danger filled the air. The deeper he moved into the Vranar ship, the more he felt watched. The walls seemed to close in around him, the echoes of distant footsteps reverberating through the hallways. He was no longer just a man. He was a lone soldier in enemy territory. In the heart of the warship's core, Zorana moved swiftly, her mind laser-focused. The chamber was enormous, filled with pulsing energy conduits that hummed with raw power. She was close now, so close to the heart of the Vranar's weapon, and the thought of avenging her people fueled her every movement. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for every race that had been lost to the Vranar's unrelenting thirst for conquest. The device she needed to disable the core was right in front of her, glowing with blue energy. She had seen it before. This was where the Vranar's power originated. But as she reached for it, something shifted. The ground beneath her feet shook, a deafening roar filling the air. "Ambush," she shouted into her communicator. Daniel's voice crackled back, barely audible. "What's happening?" "Zorana, talk to me." Before she could respond, the door to the chamber exploded open, and a squad of Vranar soldiers charged in, their weapons raised. They were taller, more massive than any human, their armor gleaming with deadly precision. Zorana drew her blade in an instant, the hum of its edge slicing through the air. "I'm not going down without a fight," she hissed, her voice cold. Daniel had barely planted the last of the explosive charges when the comms cut out. Panic surged through him. What had happened? He sprinted down the narrow hall, his pulse thudding in his ears. He didn't need to ask. He could feel it. The battle had already begun. As he reached the junction to the central core, the sound of blaster fire echoed down the corridor, followed by Zorana's voice, sharp and fierce, urging him forward. "Now," she shouted. Daniel didn't wait. He hit the switch, and the countdown began. The Vranar ship's fate was sealed. As the explosion rippled through the ship, he felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, but there was no time to celebrate. The ship was falling apart, and they had to escape before they were caught in the blast. Zorana, bloody but unbroken, met him at the ship's docking port. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. She moved with the determination of a warrior, her eyes alight with something more than vengeance, something that resembled peace. Daniel followed her into their ship, and as they blasted off, leaving the Vranar warship burning in their wake, he realized the cost of their victory. The galaxy was still out there, waiting for them. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel believed humanity had a place in it. The mission was over, but their fight had only just begun.